Did you know that 70% of businesses fail within the first 5 years? How do you avoid joining this business graveyard? Learn from other business owners who have overcome major challenges and gone on to run thriving businesses on the I Survived Business Podcast. If you're an aspiring or active business owner, tune in now to hear their can't-miss inspiring stories. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the I Survived Business Podcast. My guest is Richard Watson. He's the author of A Firm Worth Building. So we're going to talk about that, and he's considered a guru in scaling to exit a business. So we're going to talk about company culture and all the other work that he does. So welcome. Thanks for coming, Rich.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
If you don't mind, tell me first a bit about your background, and then we'll get into the work you're currently doing today.
So just as quick as I can, background in biochemistry, did that for a couple of years and thought, this is silly. I'm just going to be a cog in the wheel. Went into the insurance business, miserable because there's a 95% mortality rate there in getting into that. But it taught me a lot.
Wow.
Was a survivor. It taught me a lot about how to run a business, build a business. That business eventually morphed into a registered investment advisor. And that thing grew and grew and grew to the point we run about $500 million. And then we started building other businesses. We built the National Referral Network, real estate management company, and so on. Once you start to figure out business, it just, that side starts to open up to you. It's not just one thing.
Yeah, a lot of the podcasts, what I want to focus on is some of the challenges you've had in the various businesses, ones that really, could have knocked you out of the running. Because I want other people listening to benefit from the mistakes others have made, not to, and overcome. So that's why I want to ask you. So what, in your business career, what have been some of the big challenges and what did you learn from them? How did you overcome them?
Actually, you're trying to, you get to the point where just trying to run the business on your own is pretty tough. But you start spinning another plate in there by adding employees, and that's just a nightmare because there's a whole nother set. And I think that you scale to 1 or 2, maybe even 3 people, that's a completely different skill set than scaling to 10 people. And scaling to 20 is a completely different skill set again. So all of a sudden, new things start to become more and more important.
Is it by tens that the watermarks are? Or is it,
I don't know,
first one and then 50? And
I think the first one is, candidly, most of the time that your employee is making more money net than you are. And so you're trying to pay for something, but you don't have any money to do it. And you need to delegate, but learning to delegate is a skill that you're trying to do at the same time you're paying somebody who's making more than you. And you end up keeping a lot on your plate. So that's the first challenge. And then I think you start getting into multiple people. Now we start thinking about, how do these people relate to each other? Are they all the same person that you stamped out? Or do they bring different skill sets? And are you appreciating those and using those? And I think when you start getting bigger than that, 10, 20, whatever that number, I don't think it scales in tens, but I would say the first 10 is one thing and the first 100 would be a different thing. I think that your company culture and the personality or the culture of the company starts to matter more and more because it's what binds those people together. They're no longer friends. They don't even know each other. And that's where you that's a different skill set of keeping those people motivated and driving in the same direction than, when you were small.
So what are some of the big stumbling blocks for people in terms of building a company culture or even understanding what it is, dealing with the different personalities of the people they hire, the different skill sets, the different desires, conflicts? What are some of the common difficulties you see?
Yeah, pretty broad question. I would say that you have to, there's stages where I would say personality testing is one of the big roadblocks, right? You start to go, I hired this one of my best people that I had originally. She was awesome. She was a terror to be recognized with everybody, but she got a ton done. But when I started adding other people into the mix, then she started destroying the entity. And I think
destroying how? What do you mean?
Yeah, because she jealously protected my interest, even to the detriment of the entity. So
was it your interest or her interest in her position?
No, my interest. But the point is that, if they didn't do it right, she was very unforgiving of somebody who didn't do it right. And I just think it killed company culture. So, a great person did a personality test and the personality person said, there's no way she'd work for most anybody. So the fact that it works for you, good for you. And then as she matured, as the business matured, it started to become super apparent that that never was going to work, that she was an all-star, an amazing star. Right now, we don't look for stars. We look for people who fit within the culture of the entity and who are team players. That was not the case initially. So that was one of those big stumbling blocks, is to figure that out and even being mindful of culture. I don't think most people even know what culture is, but it's a feel of the entity. It's what's okay and what's not okay. And it's the esprit de corps of that entity. And there's certain expectations that people have of each other. So what we have to define that. What do you want that to be? And I think when I was in the initial stages, we didn't define it. It just, whatever happened, happened. It was an accident. And I think over time, we realized we kept crashing and we had to start defining what we wanted. And so when we look at an employee and hiring somebody, you fit and you don't fit. And it wasn't always based on talent.
So today, I mean, how do you know if someone will fit into the culture of a given company or not? Like, is there a chart, or do you sit there with a mission statement and look at the person? Like, how do you know?
First start is, we have a phrase here. We don't want gunslingers. Okay. And the reason we don't want gunslingers is what we want is farmers, right? We want people who do their job, care about the other person, in them doing their job. They're all working together. And so when we're looking at our questions, that sort of thing, are specifically designed around that. And then one of the stages that we did was including people in some of our employees in the interview process. So I'm allowed to pick, I don't actually pick the originals. Somebody else boils them down. But then once they boil them down to say 2 or 3, I'll interview them. I'll have a perspective on it. And then it goes to the employees themselves. So we'll have teams of employees that will interview, and they care about, is this person fun to have around? They think, do I trust this person? You know who does that is Southwest Airlines. If you get an interview with Southwest Airlines as a pilot, they'll say, yeah, you obviously know how to fly the airplane. We're not worried about that. We want to know if we want you in the cabin with us. Are you fun to have in the cabin? Because if you're not, we don't want you. So I think that it's kind of taking a page from that.
Any problems that anyone would run into discrimination accusations because you're hiring based on fit, or personality? I think what you specifically are trying to not do is to hire yourself. And that is probably another major mistake that I see happen, is people tend to hire themselves. And so instead of hiring yourself, you hire. So for example, when I hired my first person, she was me. In a sense, I can be a terror sometimes. So like a mini-me.
Yeah. So one of her friends came to work for us, and she was the opposite of me, which caused me tremendous challenges. But at the same time, it completed me. And so I thought that, so then I just said, we want more of that. So now you're going to do the initial interviews, because I'm going to use that natural tendency to hire yourself for her to start to duplicate herself.
Is hiring yourself like marrying your mother or something?
Yeah. I mean, I think, so maybe it's a reason for so many divorces. I think you don't always get it right the first time. You tend to look for what you think you want as opposed to what you need. I think that a natural tendency to hire ourselves, I think we just have to be super mindful of it and say, what is that position? I'll give you an example. A salesperson hiring a staff person. That's really tough, because the salesperson has a certain expectation of what the right kind of person is. And I need someone who doesn't care about being, monotonous tasks they do really well, very detail oriented. That's a completely different personality. And to address the point that you made about discrimination, I don't see it that way. We haven't really had a problem with that. We've hired everybody up and down and all over the place. So it hasn't been an issue when we're focused on what do they bring to the team, and how do they help where we're building and where we're going.
So what are some useful filtering criteria? Which ones are not, based on your experience?
Filtering criteria.
Someone says, okay, all right, Rich, I believe you. I want to hire this way. How do I do it? What do I do if I look for a cultural match?
Yeah. So for me, first, it starts with you figuring out who and what you want to build. I think so many businesses start out and they don't even know. It's like a warm body, and that's what it works. So you figure out what your client profile is. You kind of figure out where you want to go, what you want this thing to feel like, what's good and what's unacceptable. And then you start looking for people to fill that bucket. But I will tell you, for our firm, we hire first on character. I want them to be honest all the way through. I want to feel like I can trust them with $1 million. There's a phrase we use with clients quite a bit, which is, if I gave this person $1 million in a suitcase and they put it under their bed in their room, I come back in 2 years, it would all be there, right? Because that's just who they are. It's not even, it's not a decision. It's who they are at a gut level.
How could you know that unless you spend a lot of time with the person, or I don't know, you go through trials together?
I think you try to get a feel for them in the very beginning and how they answer questions. Maybe you give them questions that make them twist in the wind a little bit. But I'm trying to, I don't know, we get a sense. And it doesn't mean it's 100%. I wish it was. Personality testing is another way to try to do that. But what I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to take shortcuts, right? I want someone who cares about quality. And so the questions that we're looking for is quality. You might be in another company and that's not what you guys built, right? So that's why the base of who your company is, maybe your company's all about transactions. Well, then I'm not going to, maybe that's the opposite. The person who believes in quality, maybe not who you want to start with, because you want someone who's all about throughput, right? So I think starting with who you want to be and then really being specific about that versus any warm body. And that's been my experience with a lot of firms, is that they have no compass, therefore they hire anybody. And the whole thing is kind of clunky for that reason, because they don't even relate to each other. There's not a consistency. That's that point of culture.
How do you advise people on how to hire? Do you have a guidebook or a set of questions? Or if you're going to coach other people, is what I'm saying. I know you have your own internal.
Yeah.
It's up to you if you want to talk about it.
In the book, we talk about all this in the book. So the book's about how to build a firm worth building, right? Something that you'd be proud of. And then it goes through different sections. I think there's like 29 different lessons on specific areas of culture. There's hiring's just one section. Exiting the business is another section. Marketing and defining who you are is another section. So, that's the starting point. We also coach accountants and attorneys on their businesses. And if the person we're coaching is open to that, we'll talk to them about, let's start with who you've hired. There's most of the time, the people are pretty good, but the management's the problem. So I'm not, it's occasionally you'll see someone who's a superstar, but is hard on the furniture, hard on the other employees. And you're like, you know what? My advice is find a way to get rid of that person. And we have mastermind groups that we put together, about 8 different businesses, where they can talk out these issues and talk about what areas they've struggled with and what areas are working really well for them.
Well, what are some of the struggles? Like, how much of a framework do you provide besides doing this for your own company or companies? And
yeah, we have a couple of big companies, but one of them is our Protection Point Advisors, and it's a financial advisory firm. There's another firm called National Referral Network, and it does coaching, development, scaling for accountants, attorneys. It's like an Angie's List for professional advisors. Okay, so part of that is we get into their companies and help them a bit. And part of the reason we do that is, so the book comes out of that framework, is because they were running so inefficiently. Like, it's hard to refer stuff to somebody when the way phones get answered, or the ability to respond to business requests are so slow and whatnot. So we do some coaching in that regard. And so we just took a lot of those lessons, things that we were trying to teach, and put it into the book. But there's not a really simple way of answering the question that you're giving me, because there's that opens, there's books and books and books on how to hire people.
All right. Do you have a list of questions that you'll give to the people you advise so they can, ask better questions? Or what is the training like if you're going to do it?
Well, again, we don't specifically train them. Do I believe in lists of questions? Absolutely. As opposed to you just talking about yourself, because that's what happens most of the time. We start with a list. If any one of our firms in NRN wants a list, we'd be happy to give them. But our list focuses on trying to develop the kinds of people that we want to develop. I don't think they want to make it easy. Like, there's a list. There's not one list. It's a list based on who you're trying to develop and what you're trying to develop. But any individual could sit down and start to write out questions that are about quality, or about throughput, or about whatever the thing is that your company is all about. And then, give us examples of where you've done that in your own life. I think that's a great question to ask somebody, is show me how you've ever done this ever, right? That's it. Even if it's made up, even if it's not even the correct answer, how they answer it is really instructive.
Okay. So what, you do the hiring process, right? Your job, I would guess, is not even close to being done there. when you onboard the person, when they start working with the other staff, how do you evaluate quickly? Oh no, I made a mistake, or oh, this person's good.
Yeah, hire slowly and fire quickly. I think it's a truism. I think that we bring them on, and then we've got a number of videos. This is something that I learned from Disney. I did some training at Disney, and I found it to be super interesting. The first 2 weeks or so, he says, you have the most engaged, most excited employee you'll ever have. So what you do is push culture into them. So you've taken the time to define, like we have employee success manual. So I want to go, and it's not a legal manual to try to keep us from getting sued. It's a thing that talks about our value proposition, what we do well, what we don't do well, where we're, it's all of that stuff. And so we do that for our clients. We do that for our advisors. We also do that for our employees, where we want them to understand how to do any. We pair them with somebody, but in the very beginning, they're going to watch a ton of videos that we record about our firm, sort of an advertisement. I want to get them more excited about who and what we are. And the reason is because then they're going to be so bound into that when they see it done wrong or disagree, they see somebody violating that, I want to get them excited enough to say, that's not cool. You don't do that. That's not who we are. That's when you've got culture in your entity, as opposed to, he never returns phone calls. I don't know. My people would never let that happen. They would be screaming from the rafters. They would be pushing pressure onto that person themselves. And if it got bad enough, they would bring it to, a manager or something like that.
Okay. But again, where do you see companies fall down with this? Even if you advise them with that and implementing this? Where
do they fall down? Well, they don't hire right. So they've got maybe the wrong person in the wrong seat because they see them as warm bodies. They treat them, they manage them like they are running a fiefdom. So I get to tell you what to do because I'm in charge. And I think it's so every decision is sort of, what's the term I'm thinking of? It doesn't fall into a larger whole. So they underutilize their people because they don't delegate their people well, or they don't delegate to people well. I think one of the things that we're constantly trying to teach our managers and even our rank file employee is to delegate. And it is a really hard thing to do. That's where you can pass a piece of work off. You do care about the result. You do want to report based on what happened. So you want accountability. You're not going to tell somebody how to do it. You're going to let them sort of struggle. And that, being able to do that is how your firm starts to really be able to scale, because you can just grow, right? The problem is if you don't teach that, you have an amazing employee and then it's time to replace them and they won't give up any work. And they're overworked, they get mad because no one appreciates them, and they leave. So teaching delegation is a massive thing to be doing all the time.
Well, how do you delegate and not abdicate, as some people say?
Yeah, I think it's accountability, right? So my thing is either somebody tends to delegate too easily and they give them every little stupid job. So they keep all the good stuff for themselves and they give away all the bad stuff. That doesn't seem to fly. So first, is the person you're delegating to, is that their personality? Is that the kind of thing that they're going to excel at? Because you want them to succeed. You don't have a team and then you take the lineman and say, okay, you're the quarterback, right? But it's not where he's never going to excel at that because that's not who he is, okay? I'm just to stretch an analogy. So we do look, we want to, if there's not a good fit, then maybe we need to step back and think about who we're hiring. So that's the first step. So either they either delegate too easily or they delegate too slowly. And the biggest thing I tend to see is people who don't delegate. So either you're giving away junk or you're not giving away anything. And that's a big problem. I mean, I coach on that all the time because it's not an easy thing to fix. It takes a lot of time. My operations manager, I've been working on her for 5 years about it, and she's getting better and better all the time, but it's still a struggle for her to delegate.
Are people that don't delegate, are they micromanagers by definition, or are there still more nuanced behaviors, even if someone can or won't delegate?
I have to think about that. That's an interesting question. I think I don't know if they're micromanagers, if you delegate, initially you have to expect that if you're lucky, you're going to get 70, 80% of what it done is for it to be done right. Over time, they'll learn, but you're committing to this coaching pattern, right? I think that the people who don't delegate is because they are unwilling to experience, maybe that is the micromanager, but they're unwilling to experience a downside for even a day. right? They feel like it's just more work to have to take it back and then fix it, but they're not supposed to fix it. They're supposed to tell the person, like it's a coach. You don't say, I'm taking you out from pitcher, and then you start throwing the ball yourself again. You can't build an entity that way. You have to coach somebody else. I find that attorneys and accountants have the same problem, right? They want to delegate a piece of work out, but it's never going to be as good as they do. So they hold on to it, and then they complain that they're overworked and overstressed. Well, you got to teach the people around you to be able to help you. Okay. And it takes time.
I don't know. What are some of the nuances of delegation? Like I've seen, you don't have to just delegate an entire task. Maybe you delegate the first piece of it, and then when they're done, they come back to you, and then you take the ball from there. And then maybe the last piece, you hand it back to them and give it to somebody else. Takes like that. You can
have them do part of it, right? Teach them. I mean, I do work with horses a lot, and you don't just jump on the horse and expect it's going to go great, right? He's going to buck and buck and buck and buck. But if you break that task into small pieces, the horse will never buck, even though you jumped on him for the first time, right? It's because you broke it into little pieces. I think the same is true of coaching anybody. You break it into, maybe you just have them do this first piece, and then they get to see how you did the second piece or the third piece or so on. So I think your idea there makes a lot of sense, breaking things into pieces. I think the other thing that we talk about in the book a little bit is this idea of edification. And edification is building up the people around you in a verbal way. Like, so you say, so-and-so is going to take care of this for you. And by the way, they're freaking awesome. They are the one. And you tell a little story about them. I knew this person. Like I used to tell a story of, you could put $1 million under their bed for a year, 2 years, and it would all be there. And so you're building up the other person, which if they're working with another person, helps them to succeed. So that's another way that you can help to work in delegation, is to edify the people around you. If you're expecting to pass a case to a client and pass a client to your staff person, you better edify that staff person and make that client feel like they got the better person in the deal, not the worst person in the deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, no one wants to be told, I'm going to put you with Bob. He's sucked. Customer service person. You'll hate him. Yeah.
People do that all the time. We see that between professionals.
Do they say that, or they just do it?
Yeah, they do. It's bizarre. They don't do it.
Really?
Like, they're not quite as aggressive as that. It's more subtle.
What do you mean? What would they say? What's an example?
Yeah. So subtly, the accountant wants to be, let's say it's the accountant, okay? And they're going to pass a case to the attorney. Subtly, the accountant wants to be in charge. And he's afraid of, he or she is afraid of giving up the client control to the attorney. But they still need the work done. So they'll say something like, they'll belittle the other person in a minor way. So they'll say, hey, I want to send you off to this attorney. He's going to do work for you, and he's going to take care of your trust. He's not great at returning phone calls. So if he doesn't call you, just call him again. Okay? Undercut his legs, right? Right? Could have said, look, I've worked with a lot of attorneys. I could work with any attorney I want. This is the person you want to work with, right? It does great work. And if you have any issues, I'll always be here. Okay? But I don't think he will, because he's just, I've never had a problem. So that is different, right? Different way of building them up. One of the best attorneys I've ever met, you don't even have to talk about their skill. You could talk about how wonderful they are as a person, right? I just trust him so much. He's the kind of person you'd want to share a beer with. Oh, nice little story. They just peg that into their head with that person, and they go off and they're like, well, that's great. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, that helps. Yeah. And I mean, like an example that comes to mind is I would go to like Massage Envy, and I would say, oh, who's good? Oh, they're all good. No, they're not.
Helpful.
They're all different. Oh, and if you have an experience with, like, let's say an employee of a company, 90% of the time, what I see is the manager or owner just makes excuses for them. They never do anything. So then you're like, all right, I'm not coming back here anymore. You're just not, you're not going to help. You're not supporting the customers. Your person wasn't good for this reason. And again, like they say, make excuses. So I don't know if you see a lot of that, or if I'm just a tough customer for no reason.
I see it as a customer of other companies. Yes. I think we go out of our way to make sure that doesn't happen at our firm, at least, where, I want to introduce you to so-and-so. I have wonderful people. I love all of them. I'm going to pick this person for you, and here's why. If you rented a horse at a rental, then they put you on, here's some really, awful name, right? The point is Buckster or something like that. You'd say, well, right, he's the best one for you, because then you'd feel good about it. You'd be like, I'm riding Buckster. He's great. Well, because you were given a whole bunch of choices, but this is the one I'm going to select for you, and here's why. That's strong, right? Then you feel good about you're going to identify with that.
Yeah, it's just rare that places do that. They just put you with whoever, and there's no explanation. Yeah. And that makes sense.
You're right. That's the world we live in. And rather than saying that's a bad thing, I think of it as an amazing thing because it creates room for folks who really want to run the business well and to do things well. It gives you room. Can you imagine how miserable it would be? Everybody ran their businesses well. It would be really tough to get clients and, be a struggle. But I think it's a pretty wide open freeway because so many of it do it poorly.
So there's opportunity for you. I understand.
Oh, yeah. Tremendous opportunity. Yeah. It's a little annoying from a customer service standpoint. But again, occasionally you find somebody who does it really, really well. And you're like, wow. That is the best restaurant. That is the best whatever that you go to, Massage Envy, whatever it is, right? They just seem to have it together. It's awesome.
Another area I've seen is in handoffs. You're with so-and-so at an organization and then someone else takes over your account and there's no handoff, you could tell. And then you're like, I don't want to go to square one,
I have to explain it all. Medical is the worst of that, right? You tell somebody I broke my arm. Here's all the backstory. Then you go to the next person. You broke my arm. Here's my backstory. It's freaking miserable. You guys, can't you just say it once? So we work in teams quite a bit. And I think that's another thing that companies don't do enough of. They get experience with one person. And then once you feel good about that one person, they want to shift you to somebody else. We start the relationship explaining that we work in teams. I'm always here for you. All three of us or whatever it is are here for you. When we bring somebody new into the equation, we do it through a Zoom meeting. We walk them down the hall. We do a conference call, but we are going to make sure there's a really strong handoff. And before that handoff, we're going to tell a little story about them so that somebody can get a picture in their head of that person. And we're going to try to decommoditize them right in the beginning.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. One of the things, like for example, when I purchased a home, and I remember the real estate agent saying to me, every house, because they're going to look at a lot, we're going to make up a little story about that house. And so that way you'll be able to remember which house we're talking about. And so I think the house we ended up buying eventually was called the Mexican Drug Lord House. Just whatever. It's the name that came up with it. But it stuck. And it was really easy. Well, the same thing with people, right? When you introduce somebody, maybe you don't introduce them as a Mexican drug lord, but you could introduce them in a way that gives somebody a little teeny story, a little thing to remember them by. And then they're not a commodity. They're Bob, in the commercial, Bob, the accountant that always, comes through for you type of thing, right? There's a commercial that they used to play on that. And I still remember it to this day.
No, I was thinking of Bob the Builder, but that's different. Well, no, that's good. I understand. Yeah, the handoff's very important. I knew an attorney that he was a criminal defense attorney, and sometimes he would have one of his underlings appear in court with the person, and they would freak out because, attorney A would have all the info about their case, and attorney B shows up in an important hearing, and they're like, what the, and they can see attorney B was not briefed and a lot was at stake. So that was a real extreme example of a no handoff.
Yeah. Oh, that's miserable. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, the more people do it poorly, the more room there is for people to do it well. I think, though, the thing that's important about that is that it's intentional, right? This is not an accident. Oh, that's a good idea. I should do that. No, it's not that. It's intentional. You start consciously doing that for every interaction, every handoff. Because if you don't do it all the time, you're not, when it's important, you'll forget to do it. So you do it every single person is very intentional in how you pass it off.
Well, so far we've covered 3 really great ideas. What are some resources for listeners where they can go further with your teaching and engage you if they wish? Like, is there a book they can go through, a website? What do you recommend?
We did a book based on the build of our company and how we were coaching the attorneys and accountants and whatnot in the network. We took all those lessons and put them into one book called A Firm Worth Building. It's on Amazon, so that's an easy way to do it, to see what we're doing. The also place you can go to NRN America, which is National Referral Network, nrnamerica.com, and the book pops up there so you can see it. You can also see some more about what the National Referral Network is all about, and the concept there is we try to make it so that accountants, attorneys, other professionals can deal in one ecosystem that's managed so we maintain quality, and it builds sort of a virtual family office concept. It's very strong, and it's been great for the folk who have been part of it.
Excellent, Rich. Thank you so much for coming and imparting some really useful wisdom. So I appreciate you being on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's always great to be here.
Now that you've heard from active business owners who have overcome serious challenges, consider implementing what you find useful to help your business not only survive, but thrive. Visit isurvivedbusinesspodcast.com.